Okay, for those of you who are wondering what I'm doing up here, I can tell you that that's the last time you're going to see me today. So we have to move now to the next session, which is the digital toolkits. I would like to mention that the digital toolkit or digital tools are in effect, to a very large extent, referring to tools of deliberative democracy. Deliberative democracy is, of course, what we've been discussing all day, and it also has come out that it may form part of the business community. Because, as Alberto Alemano said, in this morning, the great elephant in the room was the business community. A friend of mine has said that we have black swans and white elephants. Black swans are the things that come unexpectedly. White elephants are the elephants that are sitting there. We know they're a problem, but we don't mention it at all. Now, before I go on to the proper digital toolkit, and because the previous session was cut rather short, let me ask if there are a couple of questions that someone wants to raise, because the one session is really a continuation of the other. So if there is a question that jumps into the beat, yeah, Mr. Economikis.
So, yes, thank you very much, Mr. Kefalas. Actually, it's not so much a question. It's, let's say, the one that was saying from time to time, thinking loudly. So, I noticed very carefully all this discussion with the new business ethos, and I was wondering when we fulfill the old one. So, I repeat, I was noticing very carefully all this discussion for the need to create a new business ethos. And I was wondering when we have finished with the old one. So, and I will try to elaborate more. So, coming backwards, 7 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, around 2015, correct me if I'm wrong, the countries of UN agreed on SDG, correct? Social Developmental Goals. So, which is 17 Sustainable Developmental Goals, we all know, which I believe outline a platform that its support would be fulfilled in 15 years. And it was something that was agreed by academia, governments, industries, by everyone, that period of time. Aiming to improve the quality of the world that we're living. And my question was, again, I'm saying it's not a question, I was thinking just loudly. What progress we have made as of then? How have we monitored what we have achieved? And we're coming again, we're discussing almost the same issue. So, do we need really to develop a new platform, or we need to find how we will execute whatever we have agreed?
Okay.
Thank you very much. I believe that I haven't confused you.
No.
Thank you very much.
I'll try to give a short answer. First of all, when you've got 17 different goals, and I'm referring really, because the ESGs are really an outcome of the 17 sustainable growth, sustainable development growth targets. When you have got 17 of them, it's very easy to say that I'm doing the one or the other, or for everybody to concentrate on what is the least expensive for the company. So, for example, what we've got today is that a lot of companies are saying, yes, we are obeying the 17 goals of the sustainable development, but we're really pushing all our attention on climate change, which is happening. And of course, climate change has become also a little bit of a joke, because as I've said this morning, there's so much of greenwashing, and Alberto said it, any kind of washing, that it's not operative. So the problem is you've got too much goals, number one. Number two, we're reaching a stage where you need to have priorities. And if you really ask me about it, I would tell you that the priority is inequality. Why is it inequality, and why that should have been the one goal that every company should go for? Because inequality is what is destroying democracy today, liberal democracy. And the third point is that the ESGs as a measure have not developed. The E's have developed, the G's have developed, but the social indicators have not developed. So you do not have a complete picture, and on the contrary, what is happening with ESGs now is that there's a lot of confusion and a lot of ineffectiveness. That's why we must move away from them, or if we continue to adopt them and to use it as a base, we've got to give priorities. Because the problem right now is not business per se, it is business and democracy. That's why we're talking about the elephant. To talk only about business is wrong. In the same way that my friend before said there's transparency, we'll get transparency with quarterly reports. Well, you don't get transparency with quarterly reports for the very simple reason that everybody concentrates on short-term profits and not on long-term profits. And every businessman and every manager tries to maximize short-term profits. Well, short-term profit maximization does not mean investment. That's why we don't have investment. That's why we have low growth. The problem there, if you want to have transparency, is to merge financial with non-financial reporting. This is where the great takeaway is. So that answers your questions about the ESGs. Now, in terms of ethos, I'm coming to this. You need a new ethos in exactly the sense that you need to go back to business that have a long-term point of view. And if you're going to have a long-term point of view, you then also need to bring in not only stakeholders, which again has become a joke, because everybody talks about stakeholders, but nobody really cares about them. Not only must you bring in stakeholders, but you must also bring in the younger generation. And when I talk about the younger generation, I don't mean the 29-year-olds. I mean the 17-year-olds and the 15-year-olds. These are the ones that should be at the table in the business community, not the 29-year-olds. The 29-year-olds are gone already. They've come out of Harvard and of Princeton and Stanford and Chicago, and they've been formed already. They cannot offer diversity of view because all the big universities, and especially in the economic profession, and I'm an economist saying this, do not offer diversity. They offer orthodoxy and nothing else. Okay, I'll stop on this and get on with the digital toolkit, which is really another way of looking at deliberative democracy. Specifically about today's digital toolkit and the meeting we're having, I should say that this is the outcome of a project that the Democracy and Culture Foundation did last year. That project was called, you want me to interrupt now? Because I see a hand up there, but I have to get on, sorry. That project was called Democracy Catching Up with Technology. And it was quite important for one very simple reason, because it tried to find the way in which major issues, open data, artificial intelligence, the rollout of 5G as an enabler of technology, and information, disinformation, impact on democracy. What happened is, again, in a process that I'm sure if Colombo is here would object, there were a panel of experts that discussed it. These were stress tested by citizen panels, and a number of recommendations came out. This was done in cooperation with the Ministry of Digital Governance because we were trying to leverage the beneficial points of the Greek digital revolution, because there has been a digital revolution in Greece in the last 3 years. So what happened is that this roundtables came out with a large number of very specific recommendations. We put them in order and we asked the ministry to identify which of these recommendations it wanted to look further in from the point of view of society. They've done this, they've identified about 7 of them, and this phase of the digital toolkit is the phase in which Berggruen Institute, in collaboration with the Democracy and Culture Foundation, will choose the right tools of deliberative democracy so that it can provide the ministry with the input of what citizens think of the specific policy recommendations. Of course, once you use this, this is immediately both scalable and exportable. So from many points of view, again, something that was mentioned this morning, Athens is being used as a virtual incubation lab to get tools, results that are scalable and exportable. Now, I will stop here. I would just like to say that we will also be, you will also see a presentation of the Orbis program. The Orbis program is an artificial intelligence boosted deliberative democracy tool, and it has received a Horizon grant. You will see it will be presented to you by 2 people who have worked very hard on it, and it ties in with the rest of the thing that we're doing. So at this point, I will call on our panel to come, right? Okay, I'm done, and thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all awake after lunch and a long day. So I am Noah Landau, Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Haaretz Daily, Israel's oldest newspaper, with an English edition in partnership with the New York Times. And I am very happy to be here at the Athens Democracy Forum on its 10th anniversary. So much has changed in the past decade in the way we think about liberal democracy and the new and old threats it faces worldwide. For those who followed this event in previous years, you already know that the theme of technology and democracy is a very important pillar at the Democracy and Culture Foundation. And this session, the Digital Toolkit, is the second phase of a joint project in partnership with the Greek Ministry of Digital Governance, examining the impact of tech on liberal democracy. So roundtables of experts and the public came up with policy recommendations, and the ministry has chosen some of the policies it wants to focus on and implement together with the Berggruen Institute. So in this session, we will elaborate and discuss how these tools can be used to strengthen liberal democracy by making citizens more engaged in policy-making processes. And with us today is Leonidas Christopoulos. He's the Secretary General of Digital Governance and Simplification of Procedures at the Ministry of Digital Governance, and Don Nakagawa, who's Executive Vice President of the Institute. So, Secretary General, as we are watching latest events in Italy, for example, apparently these elections had the lowest turnout in the Republican history. And today I also saw a very interesting report on the Kati Mirini about the massive drop in voter turnout here in Greece as well. And where I come from, Israel, facing yet another election, everyone's also talking about participation. So how can tech encourage citizens to be more engaged?
First of all, let me thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to participate in such an interesting panel. I don't think that anybody has the exact answer on how technology can support democracy. Democracy is a form of government that has been around for many thousand years, and especially parliamentary democracy for hundreds of years. So the issue here has to do with how much information, what kind of information do citizens get regarding the political process in general in each country. So in that respect, technology can be used in a good and a bad manner, of course, as we all know. Technology can support the dissemination of information. It can make the information more available, more accessible to citizens, thus making them much more informative and able to participate in the electoral process, which is, of course, is something that is necessary for democracy in order to participate. In that sense, the way information is being dispersed through different channels, through technological channels around the globe and around each country is, of course, a very strong element of democratic process. On the other hand, we do see issues having to do with fake news, with populism, with the rise of populism, and a general, a negative, let's say, stance towards the democratic process that we've seen throughout the last years. I think it's a matter of trying to, at least in Europe, trying to regulate the whole process, trying to be able to find the mechanisms to be able to support valid dissemination of information in order to support the democratic process. I personally believe, and this is my true and in-depth belief, that technology, at the end of the day, can be very supportive to the democratic process, because democracy itself needs to be adjusted to how technology moves along, and it moves in a very quick pace. But it also means that institutions, political institutions, need to cope with this technological change. And we need to move forward to what I would call a more adaptive governance from the political institutions, from the democratic institutions, being able to incorporate these technological developments that are happening in a very rapid way in order to be able to understand, well, firstly to understand how the technology works, incorporate it in the democratic institutions, and be able to present it to the citizens. For me, it is a matter of empowering institutions to understand how technology moves, because it's not always the rule that institutions, political, democratic institutions, understand how technology works and adapt to how technology works, in order to be able to encompass it, to adapt it, and be able to function with that in order to empower democracy. But at the end of the day, I believe that technology can be a huge facilitator of the democratic process in the near future. Probably, and I would like to believe that we are in this transitional period where you get these lower turnouts due to the fact that it is a transitional period in terms of how technology is being developed throughout the world, and at some point technology will be incorporated and support the whole democratic process.
Don, how can tech encourage citizens to be more engaged, and what kind of specific tools can you share with us that are part of the project or just in general that could lead to that?
So, first of all, thank you so much for having me here, and congratulations, Achilles and Anthony and Kim, on this fantastic event and your 10-year anniversary. I couldn't agree with more with like 10 things you said. Technology drives change in society, right? It drives us to change. Every institutional, social, political, or economic development throughout history has been precipitated by technology somehow. Technology opens a new opportunity space for us. It also presents a lot of challenges. And the discussion we had this morning presented both sides of that. Technology in itself, believe it or not, is ambivalent about what direction we go in. It's up to us to actually proactively manage it in a way that allows us to utilize the opportunity space that it creates for us. So when we talk about tools for digital democracy and tools that help, the fact is, despite low voter turnout, that's an indication that people are already looking for alternatives. The digital world is where we actually operate politically, right? People are very active politically. They are debating online, they are going to GoFundMe sites, they are petitioning government, they are doing all these things or protesting the streets. People are actually very politically engaged. By not showing up at elections, what they're telling us is that the society has moved on and elections are not enough. That's not how they want to express themselves politically. That is not a form of engagement that they think it suits their aspiration. So it's up to us to have the courage to actually change our political system in a way that allows them to participate in the ways that they've come to know. And that is about digital tools, I believe. Of course, we want people to come together in person and so on as well. We don't want to completely discount that. But digital tools could be at the center of really revolutionizing our democracy in the ways that we were talking about this morning. We're going to enter into a phase, and we are in a phase of great experimentation with all of this stuff. We're at the beginning of a learning curve before we land at a system that seems to make sense, and those systems might diverge and be different depending on where you are, what the context is, what level of government you're operating at. But already there are tools in place, and there are tools that are incredible out there. I think we're furthest ahead in something called participatory budgeting. There are so many digital tools out there to bring people together to deliberate and discuss what their budget should be, and they do this on a very local level. There's deliberative polling. Jim Fishkin out of Stanford has done tons of deliberative polling around the world. It brings people together to get deeply immersed in issues and come up with some sort of a consensus opinion or vote on measures together. And there are Orbis is another one that I think we're going to talk about today. It sounds so promising. So the idea that we could use digital tools to really deepen people's engagement and participation in ways that the society is already evolving towards, I think is what holds promise for what democracy will look like in the future. And we have to take that opportunity space really seriously and have the courage to experiment with it a lot. I think as we showed this morning, yes, there are a lot of questions on the table. There are a lot of things we still don't understand about how it could work or what we might lose in the process. And that's all fine. That's exactly the kinds of conversations we need to be having while we courageously experiment with the tools that are available to us.
So we're talking about tools that allow the government to share with the publics and include them in democratic processes and also poll their opinions from time to time. But should elections, for example, be done digitally with all the problems that, of course, I'm sure at the Greek ministry you're also considering?
Well, in order to use this type of tools, you need firstly to have gained the trust of people, both in institutions and those tools as well. Let me just tell you that if I follow a very concrete, very specific train of thought, I would tell you that even before with the election, we said that one of the goals of the government was to gain trust in the institution of government, trust in the political institutions, because at the end of the day, that is where democracy fundamentally stands upon. Trust of people towards institutions and towards the whole process. Now, there were several reports that said that trust in government and trust in political institutions comes mainly from how government, for example, one of the main tools is how government provides public services to the people. The best way that you can provide, if you have the best way to provide public services, then they see that there is an affirmative correlation and trust in political institutions goes up. What we did and what the plan was, the first place, was to improve the provision of public services through technology. And that's why we focused a lot on simplifying, digitalizing public services, giving the people an alternative to do their daily, let's say, work with the Greek public administration, with the state, with the government, in a very quick and effective way. And that has shown that trust has been gained. And I'm not saying that like that because I come from the government. If you go and see the relevant indicators from the OECD, for example, there is an indicator saying, which is trust in government. And in the past 3 years, Greece has raised its ranking a lot, and it remains there for the first time after like 15 years. It has remained for 3 consecutive years very high on this ranking of the OECD, which actually says that people trust institutions or feel more comfortable in trusting the institutions. Once you have gained this, which includes technology, of course, because technology was a vital part in gaining the trust, then we can start discussing about how we can use tools for more, let's say, how would I call it, the democratic process, the electoral process, which are more heavy, more significant processes, because they need this fundamental of trust in order to be able to be implemented anywhere in the world, not just in Greece.
So I assume during the pandemic that was also an opportunity to test and increase the use of these digital services and increase that trust that you're talking about. So Don, do you think the pandemic in that sense helped to experiment these tools?
Yeah, certainly. I think we all lived through a pretty intense moment during the pandemic, and our reliance on digital tools and the extent to which they interfered with our lives and intervened in our lives was actually really meaningful. I think it did push us forward. It also reminded us that we actually like to be together. We actually really like that, and we don't always want to be on Zoom.
People are still coming to conferences.
They still show up. So it did remind us of that. But I think the trust that my fellow panelist is talking about is a trust of competence, right? Again, it's about meeting people where they are. What are their expectations now? We live in a world where things are customized, real time. I can get it when I order it. I expect the whole world to operate in a certain way. I can stream the whole show in one night if that's what I feel like doing. It's what I want when I want it. And yet government, I get to vote every 4 or 5 years, and if I don't like what I bought, I get to return it 5 years later. That's not the pace. Or every year if you live in Israel. Or every year if you live in Israel. But that's not the pace that doesn't meet the pace of social expectation. Governments have to respond. They have to figure out how to do things the way people expect them to, and in order to be trusted as being competent, which is what the Greek government did. They brought the services, they put them on digitally, which I can't say in my country. We still don't have a lot of those options. Trying to transact with government is an archaic, slow, frustrating, bureaucratic process that contributes to the distrust. So yes, digital technology can and should be used to actually improve the relationship between the state and the people, and smart governments are doing this really well. So can we extend it to elections? I'm definitely of the mind that I don't see why not. I mean, there are countries out there that have given everybody a digital ID, done it with incredible levels of security, and they can vote online. I don't see why other countries can't do it. It's really a question of political will, and participating in the political process with integrity. I was just talking today with somebody who's involved in UK politics, and it mirrored very much what's happening in the United States, where they're trying to the best of their ability to make it impossible for people to vote. That's not democracy. That's not democracy, but that's political weaponry, and that's what's happening. And so if this is what our electoral democracy is producing, these kinds of representatives who really don't represent our interests at all and actually would prefer we had no voice, then that's not a democracy I want, because it's not democracy at all. So how do we change that and ensure that we're creating government for and by the people in ways that make sense today. And I think deliberative tools and bringing people into the process and allowing people to feel the agency of engagement, participation, and decision-making, that's the only way that we're going to have a tolerable democracy in the future.
So here's a more critical thought towards the end of this panel. Deliberative democracy often also could sometimes also be used by populists and cause populism. When you poll people, you know, on every decision the government wants to make, or when sometimes leaders believe that the popular sentiment isn't necessarily what the country needs, what do you do then?
I'd like to take a crack at that. So I think this has been brought up a couple of times today. There's a misconception. Deliberative democracy is not direct democracy. Those are two very different things, right? We have direct democracy in California, and it's a mess. It's a total mess. Because direct democracy is going to the people and allowing special interests to manipulate public opinion to get what they want. It's an up-down vote, it all happens in one moment, and the people aren't actually deeply informed. No, deliberative democracy is when you get a small group, a mini public in the room, and deeply inform them. This group must be representative of a larger population, but given the time to tackle really hard and controversial issues, people overcome their political bias and the divides between them, truly try to understand the issue, and come out with a decision that is in the interest of the public good. And we've seen it happen again and again and again. It's actually one of the best ways to tackle the hardest problems. If you look at what Ireland did with their citizens' assembly process on the question of whether abortion should stay in the Constitution, it's the model that everybody looks at now. But they literally gathered people from all over the country. They spent weeks and weeks and weeks studying this, and those people in those rooms came to a very different conclusion than they had made going into those rooms. And the whole country looked at that and said, okay, well, if I had 6 weeks to study the issue, those people look a lot like I do, maybe I'd come to a different conclusion. So don't mix direct democracy with deliberative democracy. It's not the same thing.
And of course, if I understand correctly, it is based upon what you said, weeks and weeks of information sharing, of arguments being exposed from one part to the other, which is very vital for what I would call a deeply democratic process in order for an outcome to reach. So I would totally agree with that. And I would say that this is one of the best ways, or it seems one of the most efficient ways to come to a very concrete conclusion after all these discussions.
How do you see Greece developing these tools in the future? What specific tools do you at the ministry consider using in the future?
Well, for the time being, we're very much focused on continuing our job having to do with the provision of services. In my opinion, in this world, in order to gain trust and to be able to empower democratic processes and institutions, you need to be to have an adaptive governance, okay? And the best way to have an adaptive governance, because institutions are, especially in the government and public administration, they're not very flexible to change all the time whenever the time is needed, then the space in which you can be adaptive is the digital space. So we want to become adaptive there. We want to provide better and better services towards citizens, and slowly, once the trust both on government as well as on technology, which is a very important thing, because we also need to have awareness campaigns, we need to have a reskilling and upskilling agenda for citizens and employees. At that point, we will start discussing about the more, as I said, heavy democratic processes that we should know how, and we should decide on how we're going to approach them in the following years.
Thank you so much. And I would now like to invite this session's youth hack. So are they here? We have two students here with us. Valentina Rodriguez and Awi Watanabe from the Global Liberal Arts Alliance.
Hello. Firstly, thank you for the invitation and for the space. My name is Valentina Rodriguez. I'm a student from UCFQ in Quito, Ecuador, and Aoya and I are delegates from the Global Liberal Arts Alliance. I think that the digital toolkit is a wonderful idea to increase civil engagement, but I believe that when it expands to other places, it will face a great challenge. For the digital toolkit to succeed, it is essential that people trust the tools and the associated processes. However, in most Latin American countries, like Ecuador, and in many other regions, as you all say today, people currently don't trust their government or anything that they say. My understanding of the digital toolkit system is that, first, there is initial data, such as statistics or census, that will be processed by the government to create summaries. This will be used to inform the public about possible policies. Then, the digital toolkit will be used to collect ideas and opinions from the people to generate data that could be used as feedback for the government to improve policies. But what happens when people think that the summaries displays are a lie? Or that the data generated by the toolkit, such as polls, could be easily manipulated? The result is that the public will not participate. Thus, the objective of the toolkit will not be achieved. A solution that I propose is to make the data and the associated processes available to the public. So, everyone who wants to review the info and the process can do it. This will fuel the trust in the government, but most importantly, I think that NGOs, universities, institutes, and news channels could, one, improve trust by confirming the transparency of the process, and two, use the data to make additional insights or solutions that could be used to tackle related issues of today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Aoi Watanabe, and I come from International Christian University in Tokyo, Japan. Today, I am here with Valentina as one of the student delegates for the Global Liberal Arts Alliance. So I believe that the digital toolkit consists of the three components. The first component is to make sure that the people are informed about the issue so that they can have a context. If the public doesn't understand the topic, the opinions that come from them will be invaluable. The second component is to become a place of deliberation and idea creation around the issue. And the third component is to serve as a platform for citizens to provide feedback to the government. The digital toolkit is a promising idea indeed. However, I have a concern and a recommendation to follow that up. I am concerned that the use of the digital toolkit may skew the results based on the demographics of the population that is comfortable with using technology. For example, let's take the elderly people. Some of them do not understand how to use the internet or how to make full use of it. Also, people in rural areas, they might not have access to the internet in the first place. However, if we take the longer-term view, those problems are possible to be solved. For example, us youth will be the elderly population in a few decades, and also wider areas will have access to the internet. Also, if we take not only the longer-term view, but perhaps take a broader view, such as introducing civic engagement through education, students can learn about governmental institutions, decision-making process, and the ways to use the digital toolkit. This would give them a better understanding once they need to provide their inputs through the digital toolkit when they are older. My hopes are that this digital toolkit will encourage further civic engagement, not only in Greece, but in many parts of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. These are two great topics. One is the importance of data transparency to increase trust, and the other one is how to make sure everyone is included. Do you want to maybe briefly comment on these two questions before we move to our next presentation?
I don't have anything in common. Both issues are very important, especially the one that has to do with data transparency and data protection. We have been very quick in our response. One of our first laws in 2019 was the necessary framework to incorporate the GDPR and the privacy, let's say, regulations of the European Union. We also incorporated all the necessary directives very quickly regarding data, but data, you know, data is like something that needs to be protected, but also needs to be used in order to have all the necessary innovation, all the necessary information towards people in order to be able to participate in the decision-making process, to participate in what we would like to achieve through this deliberative democracy tool. So, in essence, I would call it the heart of each policy regarding both the empowerment of democracy through technological tools and the protection of each citizen to be able to be better informed for participating in these processes.
Don, how can everyone be included? How do we make sure that even elderly people, etc., are included?
So important. The idea of including the voices that are actually the most reluctant to participate is one of the big challenges of deliberative democracy, and it's incredibly important. If you aren't careful about the selection process when you go into a deliberative process, you end up with the self-selection bias, right? It's the activists that show up, and that's not going to help you get to the answer that's in the public good, in the interest of the public good. So extra efforts have to be made to find those people who are not engaged, who are hardest to reach, who are maybe marginalized from the process historically and don't feel like they should have a voice. And so I think it's like, it's potentially done right, it's the superpower of the process, is to get these people to come to the table and to actually engage. And it's that's how we get the best answers. But just going to the transparency part, I think the struggle that we have between transparency and privacy is a struggle that we're having today, but it's evolving into something quite different. The hierarchical, opaque structures of the past are socially and politically intolerable to the younger generation. They don't understand it, it doesn't make any sense to them, it's not the way the world should work. So I think when we reinvent our institutions and our systems, we have to think really carefully about the kinds of characteristics we embed in them, and the things that we think are de facto normal today are definitely going to be thrown out in the future, and we have to be prepared for that.
Thank you. Now let's discuss an AI-boosted solution for deliberative democracy with Nikos Karakapilidis, who is a professor of management information systems at the University of Patras. And we have with him Dimitris Tsakilidis, who is co-founder of Novel Core. Thank you.